The unspoken tension. Anya Coleman wasn't the type of person to get easily rattled. She had long since learned to mask any nerves behind a carefully crafted veneer of professionalism. But as she sat on that flight, her fingers gripping the armrests and her thoughts swimming, she couldn't shake the unsettling sensation that something was amiss. It wasn't the usual pre-flight jitters she'd experienced on countless business trips before. This felt different, as though the very air around her was charged with an uncomfortable energy. The hum of conversation filled the cabin as passengers stowed away their carry-ons and took their seats, but Anya couldn't escape the feeling that she was the subject of some kind of unspoken scrutiny. The flight attendants moved efficiently, their movements brisk but oddly deliberate, almost too focused on ensuring that everything went smoothly. But it was the glances that lingered just a second too long, that caught Anya's attention. At first, she brushed it off as paranoia. She was traveling for work, after all. She had done this 100 times before. A corporate presentation in Denver for a potential client that could make or break the next phase of her career. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, fine-tuning her pitch, practicing the statistics that would emphasize the need for her client's services. Everything had to go right. Her entire career hinged on it. Her heart sank as she thought of her daughter, Deja, who was growing up too fast. At 11 years old, Deja was starting to ask questions that Anya wasn't always sure how to answer, questions about race, about the world, about how Anya had made the choices she had to secure a future for them both. Anya had sacrificed so much time with Deja to build her career. There were nights when she had put her phone on silent, just to ensure that she was fully present for her daughter. But Deja needed more than her presence, she needed her mother's example. Anya had often told herself that once she succeeded, once she climbed to the top, everything would be worth it. She would finally be able to provide for Deja the way she'd always dreamed of, no more struggles, no more sacrifices. The pressure to succeed had kept her focused, but today, as the plane settled into the air, that pressure felt like an unbearable weight. As the plane's engines roared to life and the aircraft took off, Anya looked out the window at the dreary gray sky. The clouds loomed ominously over the horizon, casting a pallor over the world below. She had always found comfort in the routine of air travel, the predictable safety of being airborne, away from the chaos of everyday life. But today, even that sense of comfort felt fleeting. The unease in her chest only seemed to grow as the plane climbed higher. She shifted in her seat, trying to relax, trying to focus on the task ahead. But her mind kept drifting back to the strange undercurrent of tension in the cabin. The whispers, the exchanged glances, there was something about it all that gnawed at her. For the first time, Anya allowed herself to really look at the passengers around her. The man sitting 2 rows ahead had been eyeing her, his gaze lingering just a little too long before he turned back to his phone. A woman in the row next to her was doing the same, shifting her eyes toward Anya only to quickly look away when Anya met her gaze. It wasn't overt hostility. It was the subtlety of it all, the way the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something. Or perhaps, Anya thought, waiting for her. She tried to focus on her presentation again, running through the opening lines in her mind. But the unease still gripped her, the nagging feeling that she was somehow out of place, even though she had every right to be here, just as much as anyone else. She was a hardworking professional, no different than the others, no more deserving of judgment. But the looks, those looks, told a different story. As if on cue, a flight attendant appeared in the aisle, making her way toward Anya's seat. The woman's eyes flickered over Anya briefly before she stopped at the row ahead, speaking quietly to a couple. Anya couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the attendant's demeanor when she turned back toward Anya. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tiny pause, a hesitation that made Anya's skin prickle. Another attendant passed by shortly afterward, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The entire crew seemed to be moving with an urgency that didn't match the usual pace of a morning flight. Anya was no stranger to corporate environments, where the undercurrents of tension could be cut with a knife. But she had never felt it in a place like this, on a flight, surrounded by strangers in a confined space. Trying to shake off the discomfort, Anya took a deep breath and refocused on her notes, running over the key points she had planned to emphasize during her pitch. She had done the work. She was prepared. This client would see the value in her company's proposal, she was certain of that. But the unease lingered, pressing in from all sides. Her fingers gripped the armrests of her seat as the thought crossed her mind, maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. But just as quickly, she rejected the idea. There was something more to this, a sense that she was being watched, judged, her every movement under scrutiny. As the flight continued its steady climb, Anya glanced down at the small TV screen in the back of the seat in front of her, hoping for some distraction. But the screen blinked to life with a message: due to turbulence, we ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further notice. Anya's eyes scanned the cabin once more. The woman sitting across the aisle from her, a middle-aged white woman in business attire, was clutching her purse with both hands. A nervous energy seemed to ripple through the woman's body as she glanced from side to side. A few rows ahead, another man, a young executive type with a designer suit, was furiously texting on his phone, his eyes darting back and forth in what appeared to be frantic concern. The tension in the air thickened, wrapping itself around Anya like a suffocating cloud. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something was wrong. The calm, professional atmosphere she expected on a business flight had been replaced by something else entirely, something unpleasant, something she could feel but not quite identify. The whispering continued, the attendants gliding through the aisles like silent specters. Anya caught snippets of their conversations, words that didn't quite make sense. There was talk of adjusting seating and prioritizing passengers, and then, just as quickly, the conversation would shift to something else, always leaving Anya with more questions than answers. And then, like a jolt, it happened. The flight attendant who had first approached her earlier in the cabin appeared again, this time standing at the edge of Anya's row. She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward Anya, then toward the passengers behind her. The attendant smiled, but the smile was strained, forced. "Excuse me, Miss Coleman," the attendant said, her voice polite but laced with an undercurrent of unease. "We have a situation. A passenger in first class has requested to switch seats. Would you be willing to move to another seat? It will just be for the duration of the flight. Please let us know if you are able to accommodate this request." Anya blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand." "Is this about the seat I'm in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The attendant's smile tightened. "It's a request from a first-class passenger, ma'am. We are trying to accommodate their needs. I'm sure it won't be any trouble, just for the duration of the flight." For a moment, Anya's mind went blank. The request felt absurd. She had paid for her seat, just as everyone else had, and now she was being asked to move. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a mixture of confusion and indignation. She wasn't a second-class citizen, but the way the attendant spoke to her, as though she was somehow less important, made her feel like one. The attendant waited, her eyes never quite meeting Anya's as she tried to gauge the response. Anya swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had heard stories like this, stories of people being treated unfairly, of subtle and overt discrimination. She had faced challenges throughout her career, had been passed over for promotions or overlooked in meetings because of her race. But this was something else entirely. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet here she was, being asked to give up her seat for someone else's convenience. And for what? She glanced toward the first-class section, her mind whirling. Who was this passenger? Why did they feel entitled to make such a request? More importantly, why was she being asked to accommodate them? The discomfort in her chest only intensified as she struggled to make sense of it all. Something wasn't right. Something was happening that was beyond her understanding. But she had no choice. She had to comply. With a tight nod, Anya rose from her seat. She didn't want to make a scene. Not here. Not now. But the unease was unmistakable, the weight of it pressing on her every step as she moved down the aisle toward the back of the plane, the call that changed everything. Anya's feet seemed to move on their own as she walked down the aisle of the plane, her mind still spinning from the strange interaction. The seat swap request had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She had been flying for years, business trips, vacations, even family emergencies, but nothing had felt like this. The request was so offhand, so casual, as though she should have expected it, as though it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But the unease in her chest had only deepened as she continued to walk past rows of passengers who were either oblivious or strangely indifferent to her movements. The plane had begun to feel smaller, more suffocating, the walls pressing in on her from every side. As she reached the back of the plane and settled into an empty seat in the rear, Anya pulled her carry-on bag close to her feet and tried to steady her breathing. She glanced around at the rows of empty seats, and it occurred to her that no one had looked up when she passed by. Not a single person had questioned why she was moving or where she was going. She was used to the sometimes subtle dismissals in corporate spaces, but this felt different. It was like the passengers were purposely avoiding her, trying not to acknowledge her presence, or perhaps even pretending she wasn't there. Sitting back against the seat, she closed her eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling of being targeted. She had to focus. The business trip was still the priority. The presentation she had prepared for Denver was still the focus of her day. She was going to land, get to her client's office, and nail that pitch, no matter what. But before she could settle into her thoughts, the intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice filled the cabin, announcing the flight's progress and expected arrival time. Anya half listened, her mind still reeling from the odd turn of events. She felt a vague sense of resentment creeping up on her. Why had they asked her to give up her seat? What had the passenger in first class done to deserve such treatment? The hum of the plane's engines was a comforting sound, and for a moment, Anya allowed herself to close her eyes again, trying to regain her calm. Her phone, which had been tucked away in her purse, buzzed suddenly, snapping her out of her momentary haze. She reached for it, swiping the screen to reveal a message from her daughter, Deja. It was a quick update about her day, something about a new book she was reading and a science project at school, but it was enough to make Anya smile. It was the type of simple, normal moment that reminded her of everything she was working for. Deja was the reason she pushed herself, the reason she made the sacrifices she did. Everything she did was for her, to give her a future full of opportunities that Anya hadn't always had. But there was a lingering guilt, too. She couldn't shake the feeling that Deja was starting to grow up without her. That the life she was giving her daughter might be one filled with achievements and success, but not always the kind of meaningful connection that only a mother could provide. As Anya sent a quick reply to her daughter, another message came through, but this one wasn't from Deja. It was a notification from her work email, urgent, flagged in red. Anya, we need you to make a quick call. There's an issue with your client. Can you contact me immediately? The brief message was enough to make her blood run cold. What could have possibly gone wrong? She had triple-checked everything. The proposal was airtight, and the meeting was scheduled for first thing the next morning. Without a second thought, Anya quickly typed back a response, I'm currently on a flight. Can you give me more details? Before she could hit send, another message came in, this one marked with a high priority alert. Anya, this is important. Please call me as soon as you're able to. This is a matter of some sensitivity. It involves the client in question. We need to be on top of this right now. Her stomach clenched. She quickly sent the reply, understood. I'll call once I'm in a position to. Anya couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This wasn't just any regular meeting, it was the kind of deal that could change the course of her career. If something was wrong, if there was some problem she wasn't aware of, she needed to be prepared. The unease in her chest was back in full force. She wanted to pull out her laptop, to go over the proposal one more time, but it wasn't the time or the place. She needed to be calm, collected. The last thing she wanted was to seem unprofessional. But it was hard to focus when she felt like she was being watched. As if on cue, the flight attendant who had spoken to her earlier appeared again, moving quickly down the aisle. She stopped just shy of Anya's row, looking around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant began, her tone polite but strained. "I was just checking in to see if you were okay. I know the seating situation was an inconvenience, and I want to make sure you're comfortable." Anya looked up, her brow furrowed. She hadn't expected anyone to come back and check on her. The thought of the attendant's concern seemed disingenuous, given how coldly she had been treated earlier. But Anya didn't want to make a scene, not on the plane, and certainly not with all the passengers around. "I'm fine," she said curtly, trying to mask the frustration in her voice. "Thank you for asking." The attendant nodded quickly, looking both ways before speaking again, this time with more urgency in her voice. "Actually, ma'am, we've received instructions to move you to a different seat. There's a VIP passenger on this flight who requires your seat. It's imperative that we accommodate them. I'm afraid it's a request that came directly from the captain." Anya's mind raced. What was going on? Why was this happening to her? She looked up at the attendant, trying to gauge the sincerity in her words, but the woman's eyes were avoiding hers now. "I've already moved once," Anya replied, the frustration creeping into her voice. "I was told I could stay in this seat." The attendant glanced nervously toward the front of the plane. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the cockpit door, and then back to Anya, before she spoke again. "I'm afraid this is no longer negotiable. We really need you to move, ma'am. Please." Anya felt the tightness in her chest again. It was as though she was being trapped in a corner, with no way to defend herself. She opened her mouth to respond, to protest, but before she could speak, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a phone call. Without thinking, Anya answered the call. "Anya, thank God you picked up. I need you to listen very carefully," came the voice on the other end, frantic and low. "We have a situation. The client, there's been a miscommunication. There's a problem with the proposal, and we need to fix it before you land." Anya's stomach churned. "What do you mean? What happened?" "Just stay calm," the voice continued, the words coming fast now. "We need to adjust the final numbers. There was an error in the projections, and we're not going to win the contract unless you correct it. Immediately." Anya's mind went blank for a moment, and she fought to keep her voice steady. "I'm on a plane right now. What do you need me to do? We've already emailed you the corrected figures. Open your inbox. You need to revise your presentation and reframe the key points before the meeting. Trust me, it's a game changer." The world seemed to slow down as the words hung in the air. Her mind raced as she thought of the flight attendant's insistence that she move again, as though the entire situation was spiraling out of control, and she was powerless to stop it. But she had no choice. Anya glanced toward the front of the plane, where the attendants were watching her. She had to act now. She had to fix the presentation, address the problem, and navigate this surreal situation. The call had made one thing clear. Things were not going as planned, and it was all starting to unravel faster than she could comprehend. As she adjusted her seat, the attendant's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am, we're really going to need to move you now." Her eyes narrowed as the tension finally broke through. This wasn't just about seating anymore. It was about something bigger, something that Anya wasn't sure she was ready to face. But as she clicked through the new figures in her inbox, she knew one thing for sure: her day was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. The unfolding truth. Anya's fingers hovered above her phone, her mind scrambling to process the two very different crises unfolding in her life. The flight attendant stood before her, her expression now a mix of anxiety and urgency. "Ma'am, we really need to move you," the attendant repeated, almost pleading. There was something in her voice that made Anya pause. It wasn't just a routine request. She could sense it. Something about the way the attendant was looking at her, almost as if she was caught in a moment of discomfort, like she knew this was wrong but was trapped in a system she couldn't fight. Anya closed her eyes for a second, trying to collect her thoughts. The phone call had shaken her. The urgency in her colleague's voice was not to be taken lightly. The error in the proposal? She had been meticulous, painstakingly thorough, but the mention of the corrected figures triggered a cold panic. Could it really be true that the numbers had been wrong all along? And the bigger question, why wasn't she notified earlier? But her thoughts quickly shifted back to the current situation. The flight attendants were being unusually persistent, and Anya could sense a pressure mounting on her to comply, as though she didn't have a choice in the matter. She bit her lip, trying to keep her frustration at bay. "Listen," she said, her voice firm but calm, "I've already moved once. You don't get to decide where I sit just because I'm being asked to accommodate another passenger. What is really going on here?" The attendant flinched, her gaze darting nervously toward the front of the plane. She looked like she wanted to say more but was afraid to. Anya's pulse quickened. Whatever was happening, it didn't seem right. The attendant opened her mouth to respond but was cut off by another voice, this time from the aisle. A tall man in a sharp suit, carrying a briefcase, walked toward them. He had an air of authority about him, and his steps were deliberate, almost as if he had been watching Anya for some time. He approached the attendant and nodded curtly at her, his eyes briefly meeting Anya's. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you'll have to comply. The captain has instructed us to make this change. If you refuse, I'll have to ask you to leave the flight." Anya's heart dropped. There it was, the threat she had been anticipating, the silent ultimatum. "Excuse me?" Anya asked, her voice rising just slightly. "Are you threatening to kick me off the flight because I won't give up my seat?" The man's face remained emotionless, but there was something cold in his eyes that made Anya's stomach churn. "I'm simply telling you that if you refuse, there will be consequences. We cannot delay the flight further." A chill ran down Anya's spine. She had dealt with difficult people before, both in her personal life and at work. But this felt different. It wasn't just about customer service. It was about power and control, a deliberate attempt to silence her. She could feel the eyes of the passengers on her, but not one person said a word. They were all witnesses, but no one seemed inclined to intervene. Her grip on the phone tightened as her mind raced. How had things escalated so quickly? The seat swap was supposed to be a simple request, but now, it felt like something far deeper was at play. She thought about Deja, how she'd been worried about her earlier. She thought about the proposal that had just been flagged as a potential disaster. But above all, she thought about how this moment, this seemingly insignificant moment, was about to change everything. "I'm not leaving," Anya said, standing her ground. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "If I'm being asked to move, I need to know why. I want to speak to the captain directly." The man, who had now assumed the role of the enforcer, narrowed his eyes. "That won't be possible. The decision has already been made. Please cooperate." Anya could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. Her flight, her career, her future, everything was teetering on the edge, and she wasn't going to let someone push her around. Not now, not ever. With a deep breath, Anya rose from her seat, her heels clicking sharply on the cabin floor. "You know what?" she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "I'm done with this. I'll be reporting this to the authorities the moment we land." The man's eyes flickered with something resembling irritation. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to call security." Anya's anger flared. Call whoever you want. But I'm not going anywhere until I understand what's really going on. The attendant and the man exchanged a glance, but neither spoke. They seemed to have reached a deadlock. Anya's eyes darted around the cabin again, and for the first time, she noticed something strange, passengers shifting in their seats, eyes darting nervously, some whispering to one another. It was as though a silent agreement had been made. They were all waiting for her to back down. But Anya wasn't about to. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about dignity. This was about standing her ground, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. At that moment, the phone in her hand buzzed once again. She glanced at it, half expecting another call from her company. But it was a notification. She opened it quickly, reading the message that appeared on her screen. We've just received disturbing news. The client has pulled out of the deal. The entire project is off the table. We don't know why, but it's a setback that could cost us everything. Anya's stomach dropped. The ground beneath her feet seemed to disappear. She felt her hands tremble slightly as she gripped the phone tighter. This couldn't be happening. The entire deal, gone in an instant. She'd worked too hard, too long for this. Everything she had done for the last several months, all the late nights, the sacrifices, the hope of securing a future for Deja, it had all been tied to this one moment. But now, she was being thrown into the middle of something bigger. Something far beyond a mere corporate deal. Something that, at its core, was about fairness, about justice, and about the silent undercurrent of power that had always sought to undermine her. The voice of the man in the suit interrupted her thoughts. Ma'am, we are giving you one last chance to move. If you refuse, we will have no other option but to report this incident. Anya's heart was pounding. She wanted to shout, to make the man understand the gravity of the situation. But she knew that wasn't going to get her anywhere. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, exhaled slowly, and made a decision. I will be calling my lawyer, she said firmly. You are in violation of my rights, and I will not stand for it. I will make sure that everyone knows what's happening here. The words were out before she could second-guess them. And with them, a shift occurred. The air around her seemed to thicken with tension, as though something had broken open. The power dynamic that had felt so suffocating only moments ago began to crack. Anya wasn't just standing her ground, she was calling out the injustice. She was taking control of a situation that had spiraled into something much darker than just a seat swap. The flight attendants exchanged another look, but this time, there was no hiding the discomfort in their expressions. They had not expected this kind of resistance. It was clear now that Anya was not the type of woman who could be pushed around. The man in the suit, who had been unyielding moments before, shifted uncomfortably. His jaw tightened, and he glanced once more toward the front of the plane, where the captain and crew were undoubtedly watching. But he didn't speak. For the first time, Anya saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The standoff had reached its peak. And Anya knew one thing for certain, she wasn't backing down. As the plane continued to hum its steady rhythm through the sky, Anya stared down at the phone in her hand, her mind racing. What was happening to her now, to her career, to everything she had fought for, was no longer just about her. It was about something much larger, about the systems of power that allowed people to be treated as less than, as invisible. And she was done being invisible. Done being quiet. Done backing down. Her battle had just begun. The breaking point. The tension inside the cabin was palpable. Anya could feel the weight of every eye on her, every silent witness to the standoff. It was no longer just about a seat. It was about the larger fight, her fight, against the forces that had attempted to diminish her for far too long. She clenched her fists, determined not to let this moment slip through her fingers. The flight attendants were frozen in place, eyes shifting between one another as if unsure of what to do next. Anya could hear the low hum of the airplane's engines, a a constant reminder of the world around them, of the places they were headed, of the passengers who simply wanted to get from one place to another. But for Anya, this flight had become something far more significant. It wasn't just a simple journey across the sky. It was a battle for her dignity, her career, and her very sense of self. The man in the suit, who had previously been so adamant in his threats, took a step closer. The moment was charged, electric, like a silent countdown was ticking in the air. He exhaled slowly, his face betraying a hint of irritation, perhaps frustration. "I really don't think you understand the consequences of your actions, ma'am," he said, his tone low and controlled. "This situation could escalate in ways you don't want to imagine." Anya's heart raced. She knew the risks. She had always known them. Being a woman, being black, had meant facing certain challenges she could never fully escape. In her career, she had encountered people like him, those who assumed their power was untouchable, that their words were the final decree. She had fought against them in the boardrooms, in corporate meetings, and on the projects she led. But here, in this confined space, with the weight of the world on her shoulders, the stakes were higher than ever before. "Escalate," she said with a quiet, cold fury. "You've already escalated it. You've made it clear that my place on this plane isn't about my seat, it's about who I am. You think you can intimidate me, that I'll back down because you have a uniform and a badge? You're wrong." The man's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Anya saw something flash behind his eyes, a fleeting recognition that she wasn't the meek, apologetic passenger he had hoped for. He straightened up, as if recalibrating, then turned toward the attendants. "Get the captain," he ordered. His voice was sharp, and there was no mistaking the command in his tone. Anya's gaze hardened. She could feel the change in the air, the pressure was building, but it wasn't just about her. She knew that if she allowed herself to be intimidated, everything she had fought for, everything she had sacrificed, would unravel in an instant. As the attendants shuffled away, Anya quickly checked her phone again. Her pulse spiked when she saw a series of missed calls from her company. She clicked on the voicemail, her stomach churning with anxiety. "Anya, it's Monica. I don't know how to say this, but the client canceled the contract. We don't have details yet, but it's clear something went wrong. We're going to have to figure this out fast. Call me as soon as you can." Her chest tightened. The weight of the voicemail pressed down on her. She had expected bad news, but this? This was worse than she could have imagined. The client had pulled out. Her entire career, all the work she had put into this project, could be slipping away. She felt herself on the edge, her mind swirling between the battle for her seat and the devastation of losing everything she had worked for. The flight attendants returned to her side, their faces pale, almost apologetic. But it was the captain who followed them, his heavy footsteps thundering down the aisle. Anya turned to face him, her stance unyielding. He was a tall man, older, with a thick, graying beard and a face that seemed perpetually set in a serious expression. He surveyed the scene with sharp eyes, taking in the situation. "Ma'am," the captain began, his voice deep and authoritative, "I understand there's been some confusion here, but I'm afraid the decision has already been made. You need to vacate your seat." Anya met his gaze with a defiant calm. "No. I'm not moving, not without an explanation. Why is this happening? Why am I being singled out?" The captain's eyes flickered, and for a split second, Anya saw something resembling guilt flash across his face. He quickly masked it, but it was enough for her to notice. He had been informed of something that wasn't adding up, something that was wrong. "I can't explain everything right now," he said, his tone less confident now. "But I must ask you to comply with the instructions." Anya's resolve only hardened. "No. This isn't just about a seat, is it? You're not giving me a valid reason, and I'm not going to let you push me around like this." The captain looked around, as though weighing his options. The cabin was eerily silent now, the usual chatter and hum of the flight replaced with a palpable tension. Passengers had stopped pretending they weren't watching, and the murmurs began to ripple through the cabin. Anya could feel the weight of their collective gaze, but she wasn't going to let it sway her. She knew they were all silently choosing sides. Finally, the captain took a deep breath, looking between Anya and the flight attendants. "This is a very delicate situation," he said, his voice lower now, his previous firmness gone. "I need you to trust me. If you want to make it through this flight without further incident, I suggest you move." Anya felt a lump form in her throat, the exhaustion of the situation starting to set in. But she didn't let it show. She wasn't going to bend, not now. She had worked too hard to let anyone strip away her dignity, her self-respect. "Trust you?" she repeated, shaking her head. "How can I trust you when you won't even tell me the real reason for this? This isn't about a seat. This is about something else. What aren't you telling me?" The captain's face hardened, but it was clear he didn't have an answer. The air between them grew thicker with each passing second. Anya was standing at a precipice. She knew this moment could change everything. If she backed down, the message it would send was clear, that she was nothing more than an object, a seat to be moved at someone's whim. As she stood there, her mind raced again. The flight. The deal. The battle for her dignity. Everything was converging in this single, impossible moment. The emotional toll of the flight, the pressure of her career crumbling, the overwhelming sense of injustice, it all swirled together, and Anya realized something. She couldn't fight everything at once, but she could fight right here, right now. With a deep breath, she made her choice. "I'm not moving," Anya said, her voice firm and steady. "You'll have to forcibly remove me. But I'm not going anywhere unless you explain yourself." The captain paused. The silence was deafening, the weight of his indecision hanging heavy. And then, something shifted. From the back of the plane, a voice rang out, a voice Anya hadn't expected to hear. "Excuse me," the woman said, standing from her seat. "I think it's time someone spoke up." The entire cabin turned. The woman was older, wearing glasses and a plain, conservative dress. She was the last person Anya would have expected to intervene, but her eyes were fierce. She held up her hand as if to demand silence. "This woman," she began, pointing toward Anya, "is being treated unjustly. She's being singled out for no reason. I've been flying this route for years, and I've seen this kind of behavior before. It's wrong. And I won't stand by and watch it happen." Anya's breath caught in her throat. Was this happening? Was someone actually speaking out on her behalf? "Maybe it's time you listen to the passengers for once," the woman continued, her voice unwavering. "Maybe it's time you remembered who really runs this airline." The cabin was still for a moment. And then, like a wave breaking, the murmurs started. First soft, then louder. More passengers began to speak up, their voices rising in a collective show of solidarity. Anya's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone. The captain shifted uncomfortably, looking at the attendants who now seemed caught in an unexpected shift of power. The pressure was building on all sides. Anya stood her ground, knowing that this moment, this simple act of defiance, had already begun to change the course of everything. The battle was no longer just hers. It was theirs, too. And in that moment, the real fight began.